Brian Reeves had spent 6 years breeding a worm that could turn Martian dust into soil. It took Charlotte Whitaker one night and 4 jugs of chlorine to kill every single one. When Brian unlocked the shed that Tuesday, the chemical smell hit him like a punch. Inside, every bin was soaked. 2.4 million worms lay motionless, the water reeking of chlorine. A yellow paper, tucked under a bin lid, read, "Violation Notice. Unhygienic composting will not be tolerated. Charlotte Whitaker, HOA." Charlotte Whitaker. The HOA president had personally signed the death warrant. Brian's hands shook as he dialed the number he'd saved for emergencies.
Brian, what's wrong? You are supposed to be shipping us the Mars soil inoculant today.
It's gone, Rachel. Someone broke in and poured chlorine through every tray. All 2.4 million are dead.
2.4 million. Brian, that strain is under federal contract. This is a catastrophe.
Brian stared at the HOA note in his trembling hand. The HOA had killed the future, and NASA was now listening. 2 weeks before the chlorine soaked his bins, Charlotte Whitaker had already drawn her line.
Mr. Reeves, that smell is drifting into the neighborhood. It's unhygienic and against community standards.
It's a climate-controlled facility, Mrs. Whitaker. The odor is minimal, and it's a federally recognized research operation.
Research? You are farming worms, it stops, or I push for a board vote.
3 days later, Charlotte called an emergency HOA board meeting. She didn't invite Brian. The next morning, a certified letter arrived. Cease all vermiculture activities within 7 days. Non-compliance will result in daily fines.
They don't understand. This isn't just composting, it's a NASA project, but the contract is confidential.
Brian doubled down, spending nights refining his breeding protocols, oblivious to the legal trap.
Can't we just work something out? I'll add extra filters, contain the odor.
The board has spoken. Either you clean this up, or I will.
With the HOA's ultimatum ringing in his ears, Brian retreated into the controlled hum of his laboratory.
Brian, the Mars regolith simulation is in 10 days. I need that inoculant or the entire chamber's baseline fails.
It's on schedule. The worms are in peak condition. Barring a meteor strike, you'll have them.
Charlotte, meanwhile, was not idle. She spent the afternoon calling neighbors, weaving a story of filth and pests.
It's a breeding ground for flies and disease. We have to act before it's too late.
She didn't leave until 4 industrial jugs of concentrated chlorine were loaded into her trunk. Oblivious, Brian labeled the final shipment cartons and emailed the tracking number to Dr. Harper. The worms had outperformed every benchmark. This shipment would secure the Ames contract for another 2 years.
Just let me get this out the door, and then I'll deal with the HOA.
He didn't know Charlotte had already set her own deadline, one that would end in silence and bleach. Around midnight, Charlotte parked a quarter-mile away and walked the rest, bolt cutters heavy in her gloved hands. The lock on the gate was cheap. She snapped it with 2 clean cuts.
No more stench, no more complaints. The neighborhood will thank me.
She uncapped the first jug and poured. Chlorine splashed across the top tray, soaking through layers. The worms writhed for seconds, then stilled. A white chemical film spread across the compost. She moved down the aisles, dousing every bin. 4 gallons, 2.4 million lives, extinguished in less than 10 minutes. Before leaving, she tore a sheet from her HOA pad, wrote a note, and tucked it under the corner of a bin lid. The message was short, scrawled in her familiar looping handwriting. Violation notice. Unhygienic composting will not be tolerated. She slipped out, leaving the gate ajar, her car disappearing into the cold night. By dawn, only the chemical silence remained, waiting for the first light to expose what was taken. Brian stood in the doorway, phone to his ear, trying to make the 911 dispatcher understand.
Worms. This is a civil issue, Mr. Reeves. No forced entry means no crime.
Sheriff, these worms were under federal contract. This is sabotage.
Your HOA dispute isn't my jurisdiction. Call the feds, if they even care.
Brian watched the cruiser pull away. The violation note crumpled in his fist.
Charlotte Whitaker signed the note. She killed them all.
He had already told Dr. Harper everything. Her voice had cracked when she promised a response. The stillness of the dead bins was now a countdown to something far bigger than an HOA notice.
She doesn't understand the damage. The loss isn't just mine.
NASA was on its way. When they arrived, the world would learn what had really been buried. Less than a day later, a marked NASA SUV pulled onto the gravel. Dr. Harper and Dr. Malik stepped into the chlorine-scented silence.
Brian, show us everything. Don't leave anything out.
Chlorine concentration is lethal. The genetic markers will be completely denatured. This is total loss.
Every single sample reads 0. 6 years of selective breeding gone in one night.
Look at the lineage tree. Every node is black. There is no backup. The strain is extinct.
Brian, there's something you need to know. This strain wasn't just for soil tests. It was selected to be the first Earth life permanently established on Mars.
I didn't know. Nobody told me the final application.
It was classified pending approval, but the paperwork was signed last month. Your worms were going to be the first permanent residents of another planet.
The silence that followed was thicker than the chlorine. The loss had just been multiplied by the distance to another world. Outside, the world didn't know what had been stolen. But inside that shed, the first life destined for Mars had just been murdered by an HOA chair with 4 gallons of bleach.
I am Investigator Torres, NASA Office of Inspector General. Show me what you found.
She signed the violation notice. Charlotte Whitaker, the HOA chair. She's threatened me before.
This is no longer a local matter. Sabotage of a federal contract carries serious consequences.
The shed's security camera had been cut, but Torres asked about other coverage.
My neighbor across the road has a camera pointed at the gate. He might have something.
The footage showed a woman in a hot pink jacket at 12:17 a.m., bolt cutters in hand.
That's the same fleece she wore in her HOA board photo. I've got a positive identification.
She killed them all. Now the federal government has her face on camera.
Mrs. Whitaker will be answering questions this afternoon. You stay here until I call.
The investigation was now a federal case, but the world outside still didn't know what had been lost. Investigator Torres pulled up to Charlotte Whitaker's house just after 2 o'clock.
Who are you? This is private.
NASA Office of Inspector General. We need to discuss your visit to the Reeves property last night.
She tried to shut the door, but Torres braced his palm against the frame and raised a tablet.
This is security footage from across the road. That's you at 12:17 a.m. with bolt cutters.
I was careful. I wore gloves. How could anyone see me?
You want me to zoom in on the fleece? It's the same one you wore to the HOA meeting.
I just wanted to clean it up. I didn't know it was something important.
You are under detention pending federal charges. Turn around and place your hands behind your back.
The HOA queen was in federal custody, but she still had no idea what she'd really destroyed. A neighbor tipped off the local news. By noon, a satellite van was already pulling onto the gravel.
Mr. Reeves, can you confirm the destroyed worms were under a federal contract with NASA?
Brian refused to comment, but the story ran anyway. That evening, the broadcast identified Charlotte Whitaker as the HOA chair who poured bleach into NASA's worm farm. The public pounced. Within hours, Charlotte Worm Incident was trending. Memes of her face pasted onto a worm's body, or a bleach bottle, spread by the millions. Brian stayed inside his shed, phone off, while the world turned his tragedy into a joke.
The question now, what was so important about these worms? Federal prosecutors aren't saying yet.
The answer would come from NASA, but not before the internet had its fun. Charlotte was now a public villain. The court of opinion had already gavelled. 3 days after the arrest, NASA held a press conference that would make Charlotte Whitaker infamous.
The worm strain destroyed was not ordinary. It was the product of a 6-year selective breeding program. These worms were selected to be the first Earth-sourced life permanently established in a Martian greenhouse ecosystem.
The room fell silent. Cameras clicked like crickets, as the magnitude of what she'd said sank in.
There is no backup. The strain is extinct. The 18-month delay to the Mars greenhouse trials is insurmountable in the near term.
Charlotte Whitaker didn't just kill worms. She killed the first life destined to permanently inhabit another planet.
Does this mean the Mars colonization timeline is permanently damaged?
The headline wrote itself. Within minutes, every major outlet led with worm killer, HOA chair sabotages Mars mission. The public reaction flipped. Memes stopped. The absurd joke had become a collective wound. The loss was now measured in light years, and Charlotte Whitaker had stolen the future's first breath. In the weeks that followed, Brian's farm became a target. Someone spray-painted worm killer across his gate. Then, a letter arrived. No postage, typed in block capitals. Drop the charge, or you'll lose more than worms.
Charlotte's supporters aren't done. They want to scare me into silence.
Overnight, someone slashed his truck tires and dumped garbage inside the shed where the worms used to live.
Maybe I should just let it go. This isn't worth my safety.
Then, a padded envelope arrived with a child's scrawled address. Dear Mr. Reeves, your worms made me believe in reaching for other planets. Don't give up. Emma, age 9. Dr. Harper called that evening, her voice strained but firm.
Brian, if you don't testify, she walks. This isn't just about you, it's about the future we almost lost.
Brian hung up and stared at the empty bins. He would testify. Charlotte's defense team tried one last move. A motion to throw out the security footage as an illegal search. Her attorney argued the neighbor's camera had no right to capture the gate, but the prosecution called investigator Torres.
The camera recorded a public approach. The neighbor handed over the footage voluntarily. There's no warrant issue.
The judge didn't buy the defense argument. The ruling was immediate. The judge ruled the footage was lawfully obtained from a private citizen. It would be the centerpiece of the trial. A week later, the grand jury convened behind closed doors. After 2 hours of testimony, they returned a true bill. 5 federal counts, including sabotage of a space research project. Charlotte Whitaker was now facing up to 10 years in prison. Her HOA gavel was silent. The trial date was set. Brian's testimony was now locked in. The system was finally moving. But the hardest part still lay ahead. The trial opened in federal court. Brian walked to the stand without glancing at Charlotte. He raised his hand, swore the oath, and sat down across from the woman who killed his work.
For 6 years, I selectively bred a worm to metabolize Martian regolith. The program was under contract with NASA Ames. Each generation took 8 months. 2.4 million individuals culled to reach a genetic peak. When I found them that morning, every chromosome I'd selected was gone. It felt like losing a century of science in a pool of bleach.
Charlotte sat in a gray blazer, shaking her head as if the tears were theater. On cross, the defense tried to paint it as a simple HOA cleanup.
She didn't clean. She sterilized. That's like calling a forest fire a backyard barbecue.
The defense had no more questions. The prosecution rested its case. The judge charged the jury. The verdict now rested with 12 strangers. The jury filed out, and the courtroom emptied into the hallway where Brian sat alone on a wooden bench behind the closed door. 12 people weighed words. Brian had never spoken himself. They heard Dr. Harper. This was the organism chosen to be the first permanent Earth life on another planet. There is no backup. They saw Dr. Malik's tablet, a chart of genetic collapse, the colony extinction timestamp to the hour. The defense had argued ignorance. Charlotte thought it was a compost pile, not a federal project, but the prosecutor had countered with the violation notice she'd signed. She knew what she was destroying. Hour 2, then hour 3. Brian stared at the gavel dent in the wall, tracking time and heartbeats. News vans idled outside. The world was waiting for a verdict on the woman who killed Mars. At the 4th hour, a buzzer sounded. The jury had reached a decision. Brian stood, his legs unsteady. Charlotte was led back in, her face pale. The foreperson stood, a folded slip trembling in her hand. The courtroom inhaled as one. On count 1, sabotage of federally funded research. Guilty. On count 2, destruction of government property. Guilty. On count 3, trespassing. Guilty.
Number. It was just worms. I didn't know.
Brian exhaled for the first time in months, but the release wasn't joy. It felt like the end of a graveyard shift. Charlotte's legs gave out. Her attorney caught her before she hit the defense table.
No satisfaction. Just silence where the anger used to be.
The judge gavelled the room into silence. Sentencing will be set for next week. she said. The bailiff unlocked the side door. Charlotte would not walk out free. Brian stayed seated until the courtroom emptied. Then he walked out into a wall of cameras. The verdict was in. Now the world wanted a sentence. 1 week later, the courtroom filled once more for sentencing. Charlotte stood before the judge in a gray suit, her pink fleece a distant memory. The judge's voice cut through the silence. This was not a cleanup, it was the destruction of a future ecosystem. For sabotage of federally funded research, Charlotte Whitaker was sentenced to 3 years of probation and $250,000 in restitution. She would also serve 200 hours of community service and, crucially, was permanently banned from any HOA position. Brian watched from the gallery, his face unreadable. The sentence felt lighter than the loss, but the HOA banishment was a mercy. The judge gavelled once. The trial was over. Outside, the digital tickers lit up with the sentence. The Charlotte worm incident was now a legal landmark. Charlotte was led away, not to a cell, but to a life stripped of the only power she'd ever wielded. Brian left through a side exit, avoiding the cameras. The legal system had spoken, but the bins were still empty. The Charlotte worm incident was closed. For Brian, the sentence was just beginning. A month after sentencing, NASA issued a directive. All contracted facilities must now meet enhanced security protocols. The Charlotte worm incident became mandatory training, shown to every OIG field agent and research partner. At Ames, they unveiled a small bronze plaque in a quiet corner of the greenhouse. Dr. Harper stood beside Brian as the cloth was pulled away. A small crowd of lab workers watched in silence.
They weren't just worms, they were the future. And now they're a reminder of what we protect.
He spoke for less than a minute, his glasses fogging a little in the humid greenhouse air.
Because of this loss, no single fence and pair of bolt cutters will ever breach a research facility again.
The plaque read, "In memory of the first life destined for Mars. Earth, 2023. The NASA director shook Brian's hand, then disappeared into a meeting about the 18-month schedule delay the loss had caused. Brian lingered, hands in his pockets, staring at the tiny etched worm. The bins back home were still empty. 2 months later, Brian gave one interview. Reporter Kim Park returned to the farm, swept clean but still empty.
Do you think the Mars biosphere dream died with those worms?
The strain is dead, but a backup culture of 40 survived at a university lab.
40 out of millions. Is that enough?
It'll take years, but the dream doesn't die, because someone pours bleach.
The clip spread. Headlines shifted from worm killer to the scientist who wouldn't quit. NASA made it a case study. Every HOA training manual now includes the Charlotte worm incident.
We lost a symbol, but maybe this story will inspire the next generation to finish it.
Cameras left. Brian stood alone, a new tray labeled Gen 0 in his hand. The dream of life on Mars was delayed, not dead. And this time, the fence was reinforced steel, months after the verdict. Brian stepped inside his shed. The bins were empty, but the floor no longer smelled of bleach. In his hands, a small plastic container held 40 worms, survivors from a forgotten university culture. He tipped the container, and the 40 worms slid onto the fresh compost, tiny pioneers starting again.
8 months per generation. I'll need years, but at least the clock is ticking again.
A courier arrived with a box stamped NASA Ames Research Center. Inside was a bag of red powder. The note read, "Brian, here is your next frontier. Martian regolith simulant. Make it bloom."
They sent me Mars. No pressure.
He scooped a teaspoon of the red dust into a clean petri dish and added a single worm. Within hours, the worm was burrowing. Martian regolith, turning dark, becoming soil. The journey back to Mars was measured in generations now. But at least it had begun. Charlotte Whitaker's first day of community service began on a strip of highway, an orange safety vest replacing her pink fleece. Cars slowed to watch the woman who killed the Mars worms, now stabbing litter with a pickup stick. A driver rolled down his window and shouted, but Charlotte did not look up.
It was just worms. This whole thing is absurd.
A former neighbor crossed the street to avoid walking near the cleanup zone. Back in her subdivision, the HOA had already replaced her. A new lawn sign read, "No HOA, never again." Her hot pink fleece, the uniform of her power, sat crumpled in a trash bag at the curb. Charlotte Whitaker now had a federal conviction instead of a community gavel. She would complete her hours, but the public shame was a life sentence without appeal. The Charlotte Worm incident had finally ended, but her story ended in an orange vest. A letter arrived from a girl named Maya, written in purple crayon. Dear Mr. Reeves, when I grow up, I want to be a space biologist like you. Your worms made me believe. 2 weeks later, Brian carried a tray of red Martian soil and a single worm into a local elementary school.
This is Mars dirt, and this little guy can actually eat it and turn it into real soil.
25 third graders leaned forward, mouths open, as if watching magic.
Who thinks we should have worms on Mars?
Every hand in the room shot up, including the teachers. Brian smiled, the first genuine smile in months.
Maybe the real legacy isn't the worms. It's the questions we plant.
The Charlotte Worm incident had ended, but the next generation had already started asking about the stars. Dusk fell over the Reeves vermiculture farm. Brian stood outside the restored shed, a bin lid in his hand. The sky was clear. Just above the tree line, a tiny red speck, Mars, waited. He remembered the morning he found them dead, the chlorine-scented silence.
That was the worst day, but it's not the end.
He looked at the lid. Reeves scratched into the plastic and thought of 40 worms now eating Martian dust. He had told his students that pioneers sometimes die, but the journey continues. An imagined dome on Mars, green rose under artificial sun, a worm casting soil among the pioneers.
Someday, a worm will touch that soil for real, and someone will remember Charlotte's bleach as a footnote.
He slipped the lid into his pocket and started walking toward the old farmhouse. The first life on Mars had been murdered, but its children were burrowing toward the stars.